All right, welcome back. We just introduced the data to change process, and I mentioned several people analytics teams are doing really well insofar as that they're adding more value than they did historically. And that's represented in this graphic here, where they're stepped up, they are facilitating discussions sometimes on a weekly basis, if not more frequently, about how the workforce is thinking and feeling and what the appropriate responses might be. Others have just fallen away, and it's been somewhat tragic. They've made investments, they've tried to do great work, but they've been behind the eight ball insofar as that they did not have the data staged, they haven't been responsive, they have not built the internal relationships, and thus they don't have the visibility to shed light on what's relevant right here, right now. So what we're going to discuss is actually how to think about making that impact if you've been struggling. The higher impact organizations are doing great. The lower impact ones, what do you do? So I want to set the stage by talking about the analytics maturity progression. And this is something that I've used for the past dozen years or so. And it's inspired by Tom Davenport and others who had this, I shouldn't say this, but the language of analytics competitor socialized. And how did that apply to the people analytics domain? I reflected on that and applied it in my own work as a practitioner, and since have advised others to build an understanding of where we're going. Keep in mind, this is not a maturity model. I don't like that that language. It implies going left to right is good. Here, this is just a very compassionate observation of where you are and where you have to go to get to the next phase. That's the language of progression. This is how we're going to advance. And even though it's stood the test of time, in other words, been around for a while, I still think it applies today, and I think it's going to apply moving forward as well. And this is why. So many organizations, when I first started in this work, were what I call analytics hopefuls. They want to do analytics. It was a priority of the CHRO and the organization. And this is 20 years ago that this narrative first started to emerge. At that time, it was more human capital analytics. That was a naming convention. People analytics didn't emerge until the mid to late 2000s, with Google coined it and put a stake in the ground, and thus HR analytics and workforce analytics and other naming conventions went by the wayside, although they're still around. But people analytics is really what our discipline is all about and what's commonly understood. So what's an analytics hopeful? Well, you're just trying to get the data right. So many have said, oh gosh, I can't do analytics because I don't have the data. And where I push back a bit or challenge is saying, well, how do you know what data you need if you don't know the questions leaders want or need to know, or the analytical technique that you're going to apply to answer that given question? So in other words, analytics, and if you've heard me speak before, and if not, I can point you to another video, is inherently a process. So in defining people analytics, analytics by definition is a process. It generates insight as its outcome. So what insights are we generating? And can we go back and say, oh gosh, this data is perfect to answer that question, to generate that insight, but we're lacking this data, so maybe we can create it. Maybe we can go find it. And by the way, we're going to implement this system. Maybe I should go and talk to that business partner. And if we're going to implement it, let's make sure that these data elements are in there so we can incorporate that into our analyses moving forward. So an analytics hopeful is just getting the data right. We've all been there. If you're an established organization, sometimes you never leave because you're always cleaning the data. But ultimately, we have to get to this stage too. We have to do the work, and it's analytics doer. And this is the case where we're doing analytics, people analytics, on what I call an event-driven basis. We're just doing this for executives on a periodic basis to help formulate strategy. It might be on a particular theme, but we're actually putting forth proof of concepts. And when I was doing this work long ago, and it's still happening today, this is being done in spreadsheets. It's being done certainly in more advanced tools today. That being said, rarely is it being done where, okay, I'm going to do this analysis over and over and over again. And in fact, I want others to be able to do this analysis. And again, appreciating the governance and data security that needs to take place. So it's obviously not for everybody, but that would help us get to stage 3, where you're an analytics user. It becomes part of the norm of the organization where, okay, if I'm going to formulate a strategy on a semi-annual or annual basis, these are the insights I need to actually formulate that strategy. I often ask executives in public forums when we used to get together, I would ask, and particularly if they're in HR or not in HR, say, well, who regards your people as your most important asset? Most everyone would raise their hand. And then I would ask, well, those of you who raised your hands, do you want to share how you are formulating, measuring, and managing that asset over time? And you can imagine, the number of hands that went down. I mean, virtually no one has kept their hand up, over the years I've been asking that question. I don't say that critically, I just say it compassionately. When we talk about formulating, measuring, and managing an asset or a strategy over time, it takes discipline, it takes rigor. And that's what's happening with an analytics user, is that you get foresight into the work required, you build towards that end. So now you're refreshing maybe on a quarterly basis, maybe now given COVID, you're doing it on a monthly basis, but you get the idea. You're constantly using the insight for an intentional purpose. An analytics competitor is not only are you doing that at a strategic level, but you're doing it at what I would call an operational level. In other words, team leads, group heads, functional leaders, they're also using the insight on an ongoing, recurring basis to formulate their strategy. And in the best case, individuals are actually using that insight as well. And that's becoming more of a reality with tools like workplace analytics from Microsoft and a host of others. So you can actually see, how I'm spending my time. That data can inform how you prioritize and so forth. So the last thing I'll say is you can see People Analytics 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. This is inherent in this process. In other words, the research and analysis that I spoke about has been going on for 100 years. And that is People Analytics 1.0. So the people who say, well, it just started a few years ago. No, it's been around for a long time. Psychologists have been doing this, and other psychologists have been doing this for a long, long time. People Analytics 2.0, I really put in the business intelligence genre, where that's been going on since really the early 90s with Cognos and Brio and Hyperion and others, and it's evolved to specialize in the HR people space, and that's really around the data aggregation and visualization of data, what's often called democratization of data. And now we're in this stage of People Analytics 3.0, where we've actually productized the insights that are generated. In other words, the analytics is done by machines. And yes, it's configured and created by human beings, by individuals, but now we have chatbots and wearables and all these things that benefit not only the executives, like I was saying, but down to team leaders and employees. So this marries very well with this model. At the end of the day, the last thing I'll say, it's an and, not an or. You don't progress through these things. Many of these dimensions will exist ongoing. You just have to understand where you are and how to advance on this progression. So with that, we'll take a short break and we'll come back and we'll talk about the actual plan to make this happen.